All right, boys and girls, now that we learned about ratios and proportions, we're going to move on to something called percents. And percents is very similar to a ratio and proportion. So what is a percent? And you're going to copy this down. A percent is a number. It is a number out of 100. So go ahead and take some time to write that down. It is a number out of 100, and I'm going to give you some examples. Okay, so now that we have our definition of what a percent is, I want to remind us of our purpose. I will understand and write a percent as a ratio. So here are some examples. If I took 25%, what this means, it is a ratio, and it's 25 out of 100. Okay, here's word form. I could also do it as a ratio form, 25 colon over 100. I could also do it as a fraction, 25 over 100. And now this is going to be the most common way that you're going to see percents. Another example would be 5%. What this means is 5 out of 100. 5 colon 100 and 5 over 100. And we're going to use this one more commonly. Now, I want to point out one thing really quick. If you ever get confused with a percent, notice that the percent is out of 100. And so when they created the sign for percent, look at what they did. They did this. Okay, and what they did here is they took the 100, the 1, the 0, and the 0, and they put it into a sign. And if you see, we have a 0, a 1, and a 0. And they kind of made that so you would always remember that it's out of 100. Okay, so let's look at how we can model percents. And this is one of the ways we can model percents. It says, on the Castle Park Middle School soccer team, they recorded how many times a player made a penalty kick. Here are the numbers. Determine who was the best or the better penalty kicker. Now, if we look at these numbers, we really don't know who's the better kicker. We can assume who the better kicker is, but the easiest way to do is take this number and let's make it a ratio, 17 out of 25. Now, 25 is the total, and so I'm going to put total on the bottom. And this is made. So these are the ones made, and these are the totals. Okay? Now, we have 33 out of 50. So they took 50 kicks and they made 33. And the last one is 14 out of 20. So these aren't percents, but we need to find the percent. And remember, this is made and this is total. The easiest way to do that is to use our knowledge and what we learned last time with ratios and proportions and do an equivalent ratio. And this is our total. This tells us we're going to end up with a percent out of 100 and out of 100. Now, my answer is going to be a number, but then I can convert that into a percent. And so the easiest thing to do here is to go, how do I go from 25 to 100? Well, for that, I would multiply by 4, and 17 times 4, so I'm going to come over here, 17 times 4 is 8 to 68, is 68. Now we're going to do something with that, and I'll show you what we're going to do with that in a minute. Next one, 33 over 50 is the same as, we're going to multiply by 2. How do I go from 50 to 100? I multiply by 2. How do I go from 33 to 100? I multiply by 2, and I get 66. Next, 20 to 100. Multiply by 5. And I multiply by 5. And so 14 times 5 is going to be 70. So now what I do is I have a hundreds frame, and if you notice, there are 100 squares, and if I was to count all these squares, if I was to count all the squares here, that'd be a 100, there'd be 100, there'd be 100. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to shade in 68 of them. 68 for this one. So I'm going to shade in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Each row has 10. So 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. So I have 68 shaded. Okay. On this one, how many am I going to shade? I'm going to shade 66 of them. I'm going to have 66 shaded. So I'm going to go over here and do 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 61, 62, 63, 64, 65, 66. And over here I have 66 shaded. Now we're going to be able to compare percents. And on this one I have 70 shaded. So I'm going to shade in 70, 10, 20, 30, 30, 40, 50, 60, and 70. So I have 70 shaded. 70 shaded. What this ends up being, since it's out of 100, this ends up being 68% because it's out of 100. This is 66%, and this is 70%. Now, we want the bigger number. So who had the highest percentage? It was player 3 with 70%. That means 70% of the time he will make the goal. Okay, now we're going to use connecting fractions and percents. So we can use a bar model. It says we can use a bar model to express a fraction. And so we have the fraction 1/4. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to put my numbers on top, my numbers and fractions on top, and I'm going to put my percents on the bottom. So I'm going to start with 0%, and I'm going to go all the way to 100%. And then on the top, I'm going to start with 0, whole number, and I'm going to go all the way to 1. And so it's saying 1/4. Where would 1/4 be on this bar model? And well, we know that a 1/4 is going to be right here. And this is going to be 2/4. And this is going to be 3/4. Now remember, 2/4 will also be 1/2. Okay? So now that we have this, we need to figure out here and here and here. And so the easiest way to do it is take our whole number and divide it by how many pieces that we have. We have 1 piece, 2 pieces, 3 pieces, and 4 pieces. So we're going to divide that by 4. So 100 divided by 4 would give us 2, 8, 20, and 5. What does that mean? Since we're working with percents, this means this is 25%. This means this is 50%. And this means this is 75%. And then we have 100%. So each piece is worth 25%. 25, 25, 25%, and 25%. But when I add them up, when I add these 2 pieces up, I get 50%. When I add these 3 pieces up, I get 75%. And when I add all of them up, I get 100%. Now let's look at 1/3. 1/3, we're going to do the same thing. So 1/3, I'm going to have my numbers on top. I'm going to have my 0 and all the way to my whole number 1. And I'm going to have my percent on the bottom, all the way to 100%. I want you guys to notice really quick that 1 and 100% are the same thing. 1 and 100% are the same value. So now I have 1/3. So I'm going to put 1/3 here, and I'm going to put 2/3 here, and this ends up being 3/3, right? This is 3/3. And so now I'm going to take my 100, and I'm going to divide it by how many pieces I have. I have 1, 2, and 3. So I'm going to take my 100, and I'm going to divide it by 3, and I end up with 33%. So this means it's 33%, which 1/3 would be 33%. This is another 33%. So when I add those two, I get 66%. And then my last piece is 33%. And when I add that, I end up getting 99%. But we're going to round up to 100%. Now we have benchmark ones. And so I have 2 double number lines. And I'm going to do my first one on top, and I'm going to do all the way to 1. And I'm going to do 0 here, and I'm going to do my percent down here. And so the benchmark would be 1/10, 2/10, 3/10, 4/10, 5/10, 6/10, 7/10, 8/10, and 9/10. And so now that I have 100 and I have 10 equal pieces, I'm going to divide 100 divided by 10, and I find out that every piece is worth 10%. So I have 10%, and then 20%, and then 30%, and 40%, and 50%, and 60%, and 70%, 80%, 90%, and then 100%. Okay, using this, it says 3/10, and we want to find the percent. So if I look up here at 3/10, my percent's going to be 30. And I'm going to check my work in two ways. I'm going to check my work with the proportion. So I'm going to take this, and we're going to skip this part here, and I'm going to go 3 over 10 is equal to 100 over, I don't know yet. And so now I'm going to multiply 10 times a number, which equals 100, so 10 times 10, and then I multiply here, and I get 30. And so this would equal 30 out of 100. Remember, we're talking about percents, so this would be 30%. Solve with the bar model. Well, we already did this with the bar model. We did this basically up here, so we would know how to do that there. Now, let's look at model 2, and we're almost done. Okay, it says 76% of students at the middle school bring their own lunch. So 76% bring lunch. Which means if I was to take this, and there's 100% of students, so if I did 100 minus 76, 0, 1, 9, 1, 4, that means 24% do not bring their lunch. Okay, but we'll talk about that later. About what fraction of the students bring their own lunch? Now, this is a really easy way to figure out fractions. If 76% bring their lunch, let's go back to the beginning, right when we started doing this lesson. We go way back here, and it's 25%. What is my fraction going to be? It's going to be out of 100. Very simple. So I'm going to take 76% and I'm going to put it out of 100. 76 over 100. Here is my fraction. I found my fraction. Now I can simplify this fraction, and I'm going to simplify, and I'm going to this fraction. And so I'm going to have 76 over 100, and I'm going to do something called, I'm going to find something called the greatest common factor, and we practiced this on unit 1. So I'm going to take my 76, I'm going to put it here, I'm going to put my 100 here. I'm going to find a number that can be divisible by both of these. So what I could do is, I know that they're even numbers at the end, so I could divide both by 2. I'm going to divide both by 2. And so 100 divided by 2 is 50. And 76 divided by 2 is, let's figure this out, 3, 6, 16, 8, 38. Now, they're both divisible by 2 because they're both even numbers. Once again, 8 and 0 are even numbers. So now what I could do is I could divide this again by 2 and this again by 2. So 50 divided by 2 is 25, and 38 divided by 2 is 1, 2, 19. And so we're done there. So we know that 76 over 100 is equal to 19 over 25. How do I check that? Well, let's see. How do I go from 25 to 100? I multiply by 4, and 19 times 4 should equal 76. So 19 times 4, this is 36, 3, 76, and we're correct. Now what I want you to do is go ahead and do the guided practice, go ahead and do the collaborative practice, go ahead and do the independent, and then I have a challenge here, and this is going to be for those of you that finished to see if you can get done. Let's do the challenge. What I do want to remind you is before you do this, you should have watched the video on YouTube from another person. Watch this video. Mr. Morales' lesson will be down here on the bottom. Please watch this lesson as it will help you learn percents.